All right, folks, welcome back to the Green Pill mini podcast. Stacy Lee Schnell, welcome to Green Pill. First question, will you take the green pill?
We'll see.
Ooh, we'll see. I've never gotten that answer before. Well, folks who are listening, Stacy is really an expert in couples therapy and was a clinical fellow for the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy. She's a licensed marriage and family therapy counselor in Arizona and Florida, where she has a thriving practice called Counseling and Wellness Center of South Florida, with 20 other therapists approximately working there. And they do all things, so not just marriage and family counseling, but many, many other parts. She's also involved with CHADD, CHADD, which is an organization that helps folks with ADHD and attention deficit disorder. She's also involved with mothers experiencing postpartum depression, anxiety as well. Her background is really one of the most broad and deep backgrounds I've seen on this podcast. So we're going to have a really nice conversation here about couples therapy, but also just Stacy's background, how she got into it, and what you might expect to see in treatment. So, with that said, how'd you get into becoming a therapist? This is something you always knew you wanted to do, or what's the story there?
Actually, I thought that I wanted to be an attorney. And when I was in high school, my senior year, the schools went to 7 periods instead of 6, and I had room for an extra elective, and I took psychology and I was hooked.
What?
Yep. Yep. And then I went to Florida State University for my undergrad and took psychology. And I knew that I wanted to work with families because at the time I was thinking it's not just about the individual, it's not just about the child. Like I need to work with the parents, with the whole family, to make a systemic change. And I was thinking systemically way before I knew what it was. And so then all of a sudden my parents wanted me to move back to South Florida, and my mother sent me a clipping from the Miami Herald about Nova Southeast, well actually it was Nova University at the time, was starting this brand new family therapy program. And I came down and took a tour and was complete. I'm like, that's what I want to do. I was completely
Wow.
hooked.
And
Yeah.
I mean, did you have, if you don't mind me asking, in your family, as you were growing up, were there things that would have maybe required therapy? Was that something you guys ever talked about? Like, how was the dynamic in your family, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, no. My parents were a proponent of it. They thought it was a cool thing. It was something that I did when I was in high school, would go and talk. I found it to be helpful and interesting. I also actually learned at the time about, confidentiality and the importance of it because, I definitely heard things back from my parents that, I had shared in therapy and I was like, whoa, never gonna do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I think I definitely learned the importance of confidentiality and making sure when you're working with children that they feel empowered if you're going to share something with their parents, that they understand that what you're going to share with them and the things that you won't. And yeah.
That's a big one. I mean, I can imagine as a high school, as a teenager, hearing something you said in confidence, and your mom all of a sudden goes, "Oh, dating is, or like, sex or whatever's
Yeah,
being talked about." It's like,
right.
whoa,
It was
what?
like, yeah, it was like it was some like random story that like my parents didn't need to know. It wasn't
Uh-huh,
anything,
right.
like something that happened, in my car or whatever,
Right, right,
somebody
right. It was
said something I
a
didn't
story.
like or whatever it was, right? Like I'm like, why do my parents know this?
It was very like specific that only the only way they could find out is by talking maybe to your friend, which it definitely wasn't, or your therapist. So that's
Exactly. Yeah.
interesting. But overall, you had a positive experience in therapy. Your parents were supportive of you pursuing that, and
Yeah.
so you went to Nova for your master's, and then
hmm
where'd you go from there? Was it directly into couples and family therapy? Did you take some detours, or how'd that go?
So yeah, no, I did my master's at Nova as well as a clinical specialist in family systems healthcare. So I thought about working specifically with families around like some sort of illness or diagnosis.
Mm.
I was very interested in ADHD. I did some research when I was in undergrad. So I thought like maybe working with the whole family around a specific diagnosis such as like ADHD and would be very interesting. I did start I did start working with adolescents and actually worked with endangered youths, runaways, things like that. It was the time that I was like collecting my hours towards
Hmm.
licensure, and I was working in an agency and doing a lot of family therapy and reunification therapy and things like that, going to court, and kind of got away from, working around the specific diagnosis. And then I, started having a family of my own, and we moved to Washington State, which I thought was only going to be a year, but turned into 6. So I kind of got away from my career for a little bit and did
Hmm.
the PTA mom stuff for a while.
Hmm.
And then we moved back home, and I was like, okay, kids are, middle school, high school age. It's time for
Hmm.
me to start working again. And I started really diving into the things that I really loved to do, which was the family therapy, working around ADHD, and then anxiety became a big one that I started working with, and then I also became very interested in helping new moms with any sort of diagnosis around postpartum depression or anxiety. And then as my kids kind of got older, and I was sitting in the therapy room with adolescents, talking back to their parents, I was starting to feel like, oh wow, this is getting like too similar to the. And I'm like, eh, you know, I'm keeping my neutrality, but in my mind, I'm like, how could you talk to your parents like that? And I'm like, I think I just want to work with the parents. I think I just
Hmm.
want to work with the couples. And I really started to focus in on adults and working with couples, and so I did do a lot of work again with the postpartum moms and their spouses. I do a lot of work with people who somebody has ADHD in the couple and it's affecting their relationship. And then I do a lot of work with anxiety as well. And then I do a great deal of my work is not a diagnosis, it's a fair recovery. So I do a lot
Mm.
of work with people where somebody has cheated, but the relationship wants to stay together and work through that.
And so, given your kind of broad, like you've dove into a few of those interest levels, and I kind of like how you told the story for your own personal life, where you had kids, and then you had adolescent kids, and it felt too personal, so you took a step back there and went to the parent kind of parent side or the adult side, as it were. And now you've landed, more with adult couples, especially sometimes affairs. I guess, yeah, what do you love about working with couples? Like what gets you excited? What are the big wins? What are the big hurdles?
Yeah, I really love when they come in, they're not really communicating well, and
Mm-hmm.
I get them to that point where they're really hearing the other one and
Mm-hmm.
validating the other one and understanding. And I think couples all the time are thinking, well, I it's my way or this way or that way. It's right or wrong. It's, A or B, and there's no gray area, and there's no room for agreeing to disagree,
Mm-hmm.
and when they realize that, it's okay as long as I acknowledge my partner's idea of, that it's okay for me to have a different one. If
That's the big one. Yeah.
I can be supportive of their idea and not necessarily agree with doing it that way. I would do it a different way, right? I can still
Can you give
be
like an
a
example?
supportive
Yeah.
spouse.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, can you give
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
an example? Mm-hmm.
sure. So, when I want to stay away from like big things.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, whatever you
So
want.
yeah, yeah, too much going on in the world. So yeah, I think like a simple thing could be, somebody wants to maybe change their career, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, the spouse is like, well, but you're making money and, why would
Mm,
you do that or whatever? But then they're like, okay, you know what? I've got you, go do it. I'm going to be super supportive. I don't quite understand why you're doing it, but I'll be supportive of you, right? Like,
mm-hmm.
because people, I think, have different frames of mind about, there's some people who think, you know what, you work and you make money and you pay your bills, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you enjoy what you do. And other people are like, no, I really want to enjoy what I do and make money at it as well, right? And so you don't when you have those two people living in the same house, I think you have to make sure that they validate one another and say, you know what, it's okay. I got you. I support you, even though as long as our bills are getting paid, I'm okay, right?
Mm-hmm. And so something
So I
about
think that's it.
non-judgment.
Non-judgment.
It's listening, it's hearing, right? It's hearing. It's not having to be agreeing, but it's hearing and validating. And it seems like those two things are just so
Exactly.
powerful for a couple. Um,
Oh, it
let's.
is. It's like it is the first thing that I teach couples when they come to me is a
Mm-hmm.
communication tool. And it's all about listening, active listening, like not interrupting, being able to repeat it back to them, asking them if they actually got it right, Hey, what I heard you say is this. Did I get it right? Because a lot of times we really misunderstand what the other person is saying. We hear something and we take it to a different level, right? And so, really understanding that and then not commenting on that, right? Like not saying you're wrong or I view it this way, but really just saying, this is what I heard you say, and then validating them, right? And saying, I understand where you're coming from. That makes sense to me why you feel like that or why you said that.
But that's not
I'm
validating.
sorry that that happened to you. Hmm?
It's not if it says if it makes sense to me. I mean, I'll go there. Like, let's say positions on the current war, right, in Israel, Palestine, or Ukraine, Russia. The person gives their view, and I say, okay, it sounds like you believe that X, Y, and Z is the cause of this war, and it's not the other. It's not actually what the mainstream people say. The person says, yeah, that's about right, but I actually don't think it's that. It's more this. And then if I'm the listener, I'm saying, okay, that makes sense. I think I hear you. This is what you're saying. And the person says, that's right. It doesn't mean I'm agreeing as the listener. It just says that I'm checking that. I mean, that's really painstaking, honestly. And I do it a lot in my coaching is, restate things to people and make sure I hear them and restate and make sure I hear them. But it's really painstaking work. Is that why people don't do it naturally?
Yeah, it really is. It's hard because when somebody says something, your first reaction is either I agree or disagree. And if I disagree, I want to interrupt them and tell them why they're wrong, right? Instead of with your partner, your partner has the right to think the way they want to think, right? And you don't, it's not about, I always say, people will say, we fight all the time. I'm like, stop fighting. When there's a fight, there's a winner and a loser. And you really want your partner to be the loser. And people look at me and they're like, whoa, right? Like, don't you want your relationship, don't you want your marriage, don't you want your partnership, your relationship to be the winner here? So stop fighting and start communicating, right? And so when you're fighting, you want to win, you're going at it to win. That's not what you want here. When you're having a conversation, a deep conversation with your partner, you want to feel heard and validated. And then, the next part of that is, I have the couples go through that whole process and then flip, right? And so each person gets to be heard and validated. And then the next part is, okay, now what? Is there something we need to move on and make a decision together, right? Based on this information, or something was hurtful and we talked through it and, okay, the next time something like this happens, this is how we're going to proceed. Or was it just a conversation we needed to have about the war or politics or whatever? And we don't have to move forward any particular way. We don't have to make a decision. We can just say, hey, we heard the other one. We validated the other one, and now we can move on.
And you're elucidating a few stages. So hearing, validating, then some action steps, which may or may not be there. If we stay with the hearing and validating for a second, what do you think in your experience causes folks to be, I agree, I disagree? What is that about when we hear people say something that we can't just pause for a second and listen instead of immediately going to a judge or not judge?
Yeah, I think it's just a natural thing. I think most people think about a paragraph, like a monologue per se, right? And somebody is speaking, they get the first sentence in, and you're already, how do I rebut that? They're wrong, that's not right, blah blah blah, right? Like, but the other person keeps talking, right? But you're stuck up here at point number one. You haven't heard the rest of it, the whole paragraph. You haven't heard the whole thing because you're right here on they're wrong. I want to interrupt, but I'm just going to wait until they stop talking, and then I'm going to go. And so when you have to actually in this piece that I do with couples, the communication tool, when you actually have to listen to the whole thing and say, what I heard you say is all of this, not just number one, the first sentence, right? And not have that visceral reaction to respond, no, you're wrong, or I think this, right? But to really understand where your partner's point is coming from and then validate them. Even if you don't agree, you can still validate.
It almost feels like a negotiation in a way, Like, have you studied or looked at negotiating, or have you ever bought a car? Do you ever have to negotiate things in your life? Do you ever see parallels?
Yeah, I mean, I don't love negotiations. I usually leave that up to my husband. That's his
Yeah, it's
forte when we're
his
like
area.
buying a car.
Uh-huh.
I actually the last time we bought a car for me, I was between two cars or whatever. I test drove them
Mm-hmm.
both, and
Mm-hmm.
then I watched the salesman's jaw drop because I looked at my husband. I'm like, "All right, I like this one and that one. You figure it out." And I walked away. Like the
He
salesman
didn't
just
know
went,
he was about to deal with someone else. He thought he was dealing with you, and then
"Yeah,
you
like
left. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
That's cool you
yeah."
have those
Like, oh
separations. So
wow,
negotiation. Yeah. So I don't know. I was just
yeah. Then
curious.
we we have different, my husband and I have been married 29 years, and so we there are certain things that I handle really well. There are certain things that he handles really well. I mean, even down to the fact that like we love to travel, and
Mm-hmm.
so he is the planner of the travel. He makes the airline reservations, the hotel reservations, and the tours that we're going to do, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that's what he does. I look at what we're going to do, I pack accordingly, I unpack, I repack, I redistribute, like he that's my job. Like we're a really good team, There's certain things that he does, there's certain things that I do.
Well, and you're hitting on something good there is the team, and so, and you're hitting on something I don't know if everyone realizes, and I didn't realize until I spoke to another couples therapist on the podcast, and she said there's you, like let's just say you and your husband. So there's you, your husband, and then there's the relationship as a third entity. I don't think people realize that. I certainly didn't. And so when you're saying a team, the team is really Stacy plus husband is a team, or husband plus Stacy, or Alex plus girlfriend. That's the team. And so when you're fighting or when you're communicating, like it can be pretty not irreparable, but damaging to the relationship if you're constantly just fighting, not hearing each other, constantly fighting, not hearing each other. Because then the relationship becomes a source of kind of stress. Am I wrong there? Or
Yeah. No,
yeah.
absolutely. I mean, think about, if you want to go down the team metaphor, think
Mm-hmm.
about a sports team, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you hear about the ones that are doing, so successfully,
Mm-hmm.
like the camaraderie and the teamwork and the
Mm-hmm.
relationships that are going on behind the scenes in the locker room are good.
Mm-hmm.
The teams that are fighting in the locker room, they're not the ones winning the World Series, the Super Bowl, the NBA
No.
finals, right? Like, right, like the Stanley Cup. Like they're not getting that far,
Yeah.
right? It's the ones with the true teamwork, the good relationships that are moving on and winning those things.
And so taking our listening validating metaphor or model as you use, so get that step down, whatever the issue is, whether it was an affair, whether it's politics, whether it's finances, whether it's having a kid, listen,
Hmm.
validate, do both sides, which is pretty painstaking, pretty a lot of blocking and tackling, a lot of practice. Then it's action steps, and what if folks
Hmm.
are not agreed on the action steps? Where do you come in? Like we could take having a kid,
Yeah,
as an example, if you want.
yeah, that's a great one. So, typically I work, I suggest to couples before they get together to talk
Mm-hmm.
about, or before they get married, their
Mm-hmm.
finances, whether they want to have children, things like that, and or when they would like to have children, all of that. And so there are couples therapists that specialize in working
Mm.
with couples. Hey, we said we were going to have kids, and 2 years in, it's 2 years in, and you don't seem ready, but I'm ready, and blah, blah, whatever, right? There are people who do that. Um, I, it- you know, if somebody can't, I haven't, that's not one of the things that I do, but like if
Mm-hmm.
somebody had come to me about that, I would just have them go through and talk about the importance of the timeline, right? Like is there a biological factor of the timeline? Is it
Hmm.
just, oh, all of my friends are doing it now? Like what, is it, we're not financially ready. I think we'll be more financially ready in one more
Hmm.
year. Does that make that much of a difference biologically? And kind of like balancing out those things. What are the
Hmm.
core values here? Like we need to hurry up the timeline because the female is getting older, or we need to hurry up the timeline because we said we wanted to have 5 kids, and we need, like we could only do that in so many years, right? Whatever it
Hmm.
is, like having them communicate and figure out their plan of action, instead of somebody just saying, no, I don't want to have kids now. Well, why not?
Hmm.
What's going on there? What is that? You're not ready emotionally. Do you want to travel more first? Do you want, more money in the bank? Like, what are those things that are, keeping you from not wanting to have those kids right now?
And so it's both partners kind of giving their reasons, whether it's biological or money or freedom or etc. Hearing the reasons from each
Right.
other, then putting together, assuming we're going to stay together, then putting a plan in place that we both
A
agree with. And the
plan.
plan might
Okay,
be
so maybe
reevaluate in 6 months, but
exactly. Exactly.
something
Or
about
it,
reducing
it may
uncertainty.
shift, but
Go
yeah,
ahead.
it is. And I think the plan could shift when the other one really hears what it means,
Hmm.
hey, you know what? It's not that I don't want to have kids, but I think that we,
I'm
would
sorry.
be so much financially better if we waited more months, and or I was scared to do it. And, you're right. You're biologically, your clock is ticking. I'm still going to be scared in 6 months. You're right. Let's just, I'll hold your hand. Let's do it. Let's go for it. Right. Like, and so I think it's once they hear the reasoning and then they can talk through it, they're able
Then
to
it
come
might
up
just
with that
shift,
plan
right? And it's
together.
just the problem is in the conversations they've had to this point, they haven't heard the reasoning. Even if it came out, it wasn't heard. So a lot of your role
Yeah.
is almost like at the UN, like a translator between two diplomats or something. A translator, but more of a facilitator, in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess I'd be
Yeah,
remiss if we
like
don't
I
talk
say
about
all the
affairs
time,
too. But go ahead.
what is the
Yeah.
meaning behind what you're saying? Sorry.
No, no, no.
Yeah,
Well, like you're saying one thing, but your tone connotes something else, or you're saying this, but what does it actually mean to you, kind of thing. Like, how does it feel?
exactly.
How important is it? How much of a priority is it for you, kind of thing?
Hmm. Hmm.
And and so I guess, yeah, like I said,
Yeah.
we need to talk about affairs. So, what do you see out there? What are the typical situations? One person cheats and comes back to the relationship. Maybe you could like walk me through what you typically see when someone walks in your door, a couple situations, and then we can dive into how you do it.
It can be anywhere from an emotional cheat, a physical cheat,
Mm-hmm. Gotta define those. Yeah.
and some of it could be, some people refer to an affair as like it was a long-term thing, or
Mm-hmm.
a relationship with somebody else,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody else might define that as, no, like, it was just a one night stand with somebody or whatever. It didn't mean
Mm-hmm.
anything. That's, yes, I cheated, but that wasn't an affair, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
the very first thing is really understanding the hurt party's definition,
Okay.
right? Making sure that the one who has cheated is remorseful, that the affair is over, if they want to do couples therapy, and that they're both committed to the relationship. And then the very first thing after that I have them do is the one who is cheated on needs to ask all their questions and get them out of the
Mm.
way, because usually they have, something going on in their head that didn't really happen. And so they make it much bigger. Or they're really hurt because of all the lies, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
they just want the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting all of that out on the table so then we can move forward. And that they're not constantly bringing it up, 6 months in, a year in, 5 years in, you're the one who cheated, right? No, let's talk about it, get it on the table, and then we can move forward. And everyone's a little bit different. Some people's, I tell couples it takes
Mm-hmm.
approximately 18 months to 2 years, of working with me to get through it. Does that mean you're coming in to see me weekly for 18 months or 2 years? Absolutely not. But in the beginning, and that
Mm-hmm.
and that beginning could be, 3 months, it could be 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't know. In the beginning, it's very individual of that anger, moving past that anger into, forgiveness and acceptance and being able to move forward. And so it's very individual how long that process goes. And then we can start, once we start moving into forgiveness and acceptance, we can move away from the weekly sessions to the,
Mm.
every other week kind of thing.
Like, do you find couples like after the session or even between sessions? I mean, given that this striking thing happened, and if they're cohabitating, like how do they deal in between? I imagine the hour with you is might be challenging, but like at least feels like they're working on it. But then when the next 6.5 days come, it's like, well, we still haven't. I'm still angry. We still have to live together. We might have kids.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of things going. How
Yeah,
do
yeah,
you
yeah.
do they compartmentalize, or do you give what tools do you give for that? Yeah.
I do have them to try and compartmentalize and
Okay.
try and leave the heavy lifting, for in the therapy room, and try and, move past, all that arguing, the hurtness, the yelling, when somebody is so hurt, that anger, that secondary emotion of anger comes out to protect that hurt, that sadness, right? And so, when you're that much, oh, you're not going to take out the garbage. Well, you're the one who cheated, right? Like
We're laughing, but it's not funny.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
no, it isn't. But like so I try and say, okay, let's keep the heavy duty stuff for in here, right?
Okay.
And when you get triggered,
Mm-hmm.
share with your partner, I'm really hurt right now, I'm really angry right now, and let them comfort you instead
Mm-hmm.
of you yelling at them, right? And right, like tell, so that I'm really sorry, yes, I did that, but I'm here and we're working through it, and I love you, and I'm deeply sorry, right? And let them give you a hug and tell you, I'm here with you, I'm walking through this process with you. And that's another thing I want to touch on afterwards, the walking
Mm-hmm.
through process, right? But I tell couples, try and have a little bit of fun during those other, 6 days, right?
Yeah.
Like, try, like, it shouldn't be, 24/7 talking about this, and, let's do the heavy lifting in therapy and then work on your relationship outside of therapy.
I like that.
And that's what I try and get them to do. Obviously, couples, have, their roller coaster rides, and they come in and they're like, we tried and we were good, we didn't, we did this and we had a date night,
Mm-hmm.
and,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And I did, twice ask for comfort, but, a couple of times I just screamed at them or whatever it was, right? Like they tattle on themselves. but it is a roller coaster ride. It is a process, and it's hard work for both of them. But they manage. Now that whole walking through process, I
Yeah,
think,
that's where.
the one who cheated wants to say, okay, you know what? I did it. I'm sorry. I moved on. It's never going to happen again. I understand why I did it. I'm over here already. I'm done. I'm on this line, right? The hurt party is like, I'm all the way back here. I can't get up here with you, right? And so if the one who did it actually comes back and walks through the process with the hurt party, and doesn't just want to hurry them along, come on, I'm over here already. Like, hurry up, like, get over here with me. It's a much smoother process if they walk through the process together.
And as we're finishing up here, I think that's a really nice, kind of like a comforting way for anybody listening who's going to couples therapy for really anything, because if you've already made your decision, or if you've already kind of conceptualized or compartmentalized something that happened, whether it be finances, baby, cheating, and you're like, okay, this is kind of where I'm mad about it and I feel pretty good about it, but the other person's all the way back here. Whenever they yell at you or whenever they complain, you're never going to be able to meet them there, because you're like, well, I'm already here. You're like, I don't, like, stop, like, leave it, leave it alone. But in your case, what you're suggesting is put yourself in their shoes, come back where they are, and then all the responses will follow. So you don't really need like a script of what to say. I mean, I'm sorry, I can understand. Mirroring, labeling, active listening are good tools, but it's that conceptual shift of bringing yourself back where they are. Because again, you're a team, right? And teams don't work that well if they're distributed halfway around the world. You got to be together.
Exactly.
So I really like that. Awesome. Stacy, anything else you'd like, any message you'd like to get out there to folks listening, couples listening, as we finish up here?
Yes, my one last thing is couples say all the time that marriage is 50-50. And I'll just remind you, go back to school. What is a 50%? It's an F. You're failing if you're only getting 50%. So as long as you're okay with, your stuff, what's going on with you. So like if somebody has ADHD and they're struggling, or anxiety, or depression, or postpartum, or whatever, and they're struggling and they're not okay, then it's, how can they give 100% to the relationship, right? But as long as you're okay and you've done the work on you, then you should be able to give that 100% to the relationship. And then when something is, like what's going on in the world right now, or a bad day at work, or whatever, you can come home and you can say to your partner, I just don't have it in me right now. And your partner can say, it's okay. I've got you. I've got the other, you can only give 80% right now. I got the other 20%. Right. And it's just being there and being honest and open with your partner, and letting, them know when you need to lean on them.
I really like that. And that's an amazing, silly joke that, got me to laugh, as few psychotherapy jokes have. So nice job. Stacy, Schnell, this was awesome. Thank you for coming on Green Pill. I really appreciate it. I think folks will get a lot out of this, and we will link your site and your socials and where people can find your center in South Florida in the description. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Take the green pill, everyone.
I hope they do.